Statement, Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, with permission, I would like to make a statement about the situation in energy markets in light of the unfolding conflict in Iran and the Middle East. I want to start by saying my thoughts are with British citizens and those across the world affected by the events of recent days, and I want to thank members of our armed forces serving in the region and elsewhere. Let me update the House on the situation in global oil and gas markets and the impact on the UK. In the days since the conflict began, we've seen Iran target energy production and export infrastructure across the Gulf. Traffic in the Strait of Hormuz, through which around 20% of global oil and LNG is shipped, has declined very significantly, and the Iranian regime has issued reckless and unjustified threats to all ships using it. LNG production has also been halted in Qatar following unjustified and indiscriminate Iranian attacks at the start of the week. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK benefits from strong and diverse energy supplies, including our own North Sea production, pipelines with Norway, interconnectors with continental Europe, and 3 LNG terminals. While Qatar is a major supplier of LNG globally, last year it provided the UK with 1% of our gas supply. I've been in touch with National Gas and NESO, who are confident about our security of supply. On oil, we hold substantial emergency and commercial stocks and stand ready to work with the International Energy Agency to support the stability of oil markets if needed. As when Russia invaded Ukraine, though, we will be exposed to price competition in international oil and gas markets, which is pushing up wholesale prices as other countries seek to replace lost supplies from the region. And this reflects our position, regardless of our domestic production, as a price taker, not a price maker in these markets, leaving us exposed to their volatility, no matter where the fossil fuels come from. The government continues to monitor the situation closely and work with our international partners. In recent days, I've had multiple conversations with the Executive Director of the IEA, as well as with my counterparts in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the EU, and our major UK oil and gas producers. I'll be having further calls with our international allies and partners over the coming days. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a fast-moving situation, and we continue to work with our allies to seek to minimise the impact of disruption to markets and support the safe passage of oil and gas across the world. I know families and businesses across the country will see these global events and be concerned about the impact on their energy bills and the cost of living. It's important to say the energy price cap will provide protection for households until the start of July, regardless of developments in the Middle East. And last week, Ofgem confirmed that as a result of the Chancellor's decisions in the budget, the price cap will fall by 7%, or £117 annually, for the period covering April to June. The price cap for that period is fixed and will not change. And it's a direct result of the decisions of my right honourable friend the Chancellor to raise taxes on the wealthiest in the budget to cut bills for families across Britain. In addition to this, around 6 million families are benefiting from our expansion of the £150 Warm Homes discount, and we're delivering the biggest investment in home upgrades in British history through our Warm Homes plan to cut bills and shield families from these kind of fossil fuel shocks. On business and industry, we're taking action to expand the British Industry Supercharger from April to reduce costs for the most energy-intensive businesses, and a significant proportion of businesses are on fixed-term contracts, which shield them from market volatility for the contract duration. However, we do recognise that at the point of contracting, businesses are exposed to international fossil fuel markets. And clearly, for both businesses and consumers, much will depend on the length of time for which this crisis lasts. On Tuesday, in her spring statement, my right honourable friend the Chancellor reaffirmed her commitment to prioritise families and businesses, whatever turbulence we see around the world. She showed her determination to act on bills at the budget last year, and as we continue to monitor the effects of these events, the House and the country should be in no doubt that the Prime Minister's #1 priority is to tackle the cost of living crisis that affects families across Britain. However long this crisis lasts, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, we must learn the right long-term lessons. The events of recent days are yet another reminder that the only route to energy security and sovereignty for the UK is to get off our dependence on fossil fuel markets, whose prices we do not control, and onto clean, homegrown power that we do. Just several weeks ago, some people were suggesting we should gamble on low fossil fuel prices and cancel the AR7 renewables auction. When I made my statement on that auction, I warned the House that people can have incredibly short memories, given that we're just 4 years on from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I warned at the time it was a foolish and dangerous gamble to bet on geopolitical stability at a time of greater geopolitical instability than at any time for generations. I warned the opposition had failed to learn the lessons from the Ukraine crisis, which caused the worst cost of living crisis in memory. And I warn that a dogma of opposing clean energy would damage this country and risk families and businesses being left to pick up the bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, the events of recent days have unfortunately shown why this would be such a dangerous and reckless strategy, and we will continue to reject it. Instead, our AR7 renewables auction alone will supply enough homegrown, secure, clean power for the equivalent of 16 million homes. Power we will not have to source from the international gas market, power that will not be at the mercy of international events, power over which we, not fossil fuel markets, have control. Of course, our North Sea production continues to play a very important and valuable role in our energy system. But as we learn the right lessons of this crisis, this government will not succumb to the false arguments peddled by some. It's a maturing basin accounts for less than 0.7% of global oil and gas production. New exploration licences are completely marginal to that basin and would make no difference to the prices set by international markets and paid by UK bill payers. More UK production wouldn't reduce the global price of gas. Not my words, but the words of the former Minister for Energy, Greg Hands, in 2022, in the midst of the last energy crisis. And indeed, the Shadow Energy Secretary herself said in 2023, new licences, and I quote, wouldn't necessarily bring energy bills down. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government has taken the decision to keep existing fields open for their lifetime, including through transitional energy certificates in our North Sea Future Plan, as called for and welcomed by industry, and also the decision not to issue new licences to explore new fields, as the science tells us is the right thing to do, because this government will not ignore the biggest long-term threat multiplier to our security and stability that we face, the climate crisis. For us on this side, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, the lesson of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the lesson of recent days is that the only route to greater energy independence for Britain is our mission, and we will double down on it. Because every solar panel we install, every wind turbine we put up, every nuclear power station we build makes us more secure as a country and protects families and businesses from these kind of energy shocks. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government has learned the lessons of the geopolitical instability we have seen and continue to see. In an unstable world, we will keep driving for energy sovereignty and abundance with clean homegrown power. We will not gamble with the British people's money in the fossil fuel casino and ignore the lessons of the past. We have shown a determination to act to help families, and we will continue to do so. And we will work with our allies and partners to defend our national interest and seek to bring this conflict to an end for the benefit of citizens at home and the stability of the world. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. Madam Deputy Speaker, the events in the Middle East this past week have shown why it is so vital that the government is doing all it can to ensure that UK businesses and households have a secure, reliable supply of dispatchable energy, a supply that we can rely on. Affordable energy is vitally important, but as important is security of supply. There was nothing new in the Secretary of State's statement today. No actions, just notes of some meetings. There were actions and there are actions he can take, and he could take them now, both for supplies and for bills. No matter how much the Green Lobby or the Secretary of State wishes the UK could end its reliance on oil and gas overnight, we cannot. 40% of the UK's energy comes from gas. It's the UK's single biggest energy source. 24 million UK homes and 500,000 businesses are connected to the gas grid. Currently, 43% of the gas used in the UK is produced in our North Sea basin. It is a vital energy source. Every molecule of gas produced by the UK in the North Sea is piped onto our shores and into our grid. The oil produced comes on shore either here or to Europe to be refined. It does not and cannot get caught in the Straits of Hormuz or elsewhere. It is a secure supply of oil for the UK. Our North Sea oil and gas sector has been, is and should remain vital for our national security and as a national security resource for many years. It is a resource that the Government and this Secretary of State is actively trying to shut down, however. The GMB Scotland Secretary has called his plans delusional and mean that we are facing, and I quote, the most destructive industrial calamity in the nation's history, a disaster risking jobs, communities, even higher bills and our energy security. That's from the GMB Scotland Secretary. The North Sea oil and gas industry and its workforce must be protected. He knows that this is the workforce and these are the supply chains which will, if still here, deliver the rollout of technologies like wind and nuclear into the future. The Secretary of State must overturn his ban on new oil and gas licences. Will he? He must immediately give confidence to the industry that they have a future in the North Sea by finally granting Jackdaw and Rosebank. What is taking so long? And to kickstart investment and to stem the accelerating fall in production and to secure the skilled workforce and supply chains, he must, with the Treasury, end the Energy Profits Levy now. Nuclear is the UK's route to energy security. Nuclear works in the winter, can run 24/7 and is at latest prices worldwide shows it can be much cheaper too. But as the Secretary of State knows, our existing plants are nearing the end of life and the Government is stalling on actions to replace or renew new gigawatt-scale sites. They have ruled out large-scale nuclear at Wilver and dropped the previous Conservative Government's 24-gigawatt target. In light of current events, does the Secretary of State accept that not granting a new gigawatt-scale plant at Wilver, arguably the best site in the country for a large-scale plant, was a huge missed opportunity? We are still waiting for the Government to accept recommendations from the Fingleton Review, which will make nuclear cheaper and easier to build. When will he do so, and will he do so in full? And I will briefly touch on the absolute Luddite approach to energy that the SNP have in Scotland. They try to talk a good game and to sound like they support energy workers, energy generation and energy investment, but that's an illusion. They've got a ban on new nuclear, still a presumption against new oil and gas, and they're happy to coat the countryside in pylons and turbines and batteries, but have no plan whatsoever for when the wind doesn't blow. The Secretary of State last year signed a secret energy deal with China, and he doesn't like it to be called a secret, but what other word can there be when he refused to publish details month after month, and he only published it after sustained pressure from my right honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State for Energy. And it's no surprise he wanted to keep it a secret, agreeing to cooperate with China, a known threat, on batteries, on cables, on inverters, on turbines, effectively giving a nation that is known to have interfered in numerous sovereign states and has placed kill switches in energy infrastructure it has exported, giving them access to our energy grid. That is at best foolish and at worst reckless. Whatever you call it, it is another threat to our energy security. Madam Deputy Speaker, businesses are struggling with sky-high energy prices and households are bracing themselves for energy bills that may rise significantly this year. The Conservatives' Clean Power Plan would reduce bills by 20%. The Secretary of State could take that action today. Will he adopt our cheap power plan?
Let me answer her questions, which I will do in a moment. I do say to the honourable lady, though, that I think the biggest question for this House and the country is, do we learn the lessons of these crises? You know, half of the recessions that have happened since the 1970s have been caused by fossil fuel price spikes. And we all face a choice, which is we can either learn the lessons of these crises and drive to clean homegrown power, which actually, to be fair, at some points used to be the policy of the last Conservative government, or we can pretend that those lessons don't exist and we can keep repeating the same mistake again and again. And I fear that what's happened to the Conservative Party since the general election is having already sort of gone halfway away from that important lesson, they've now gone fully away from it. And that takes me to the answer to her questions. On nuclear, we're doing the biggest nuclear building programme for half a century. We're doing all of the things that the last government promised and never delivered. Where were they with Sizewell C? They said they'd have agreement in the last Parliament. They didn't. We're doing it. Where were they with SMRs? We're actually doing it. Yes, we will publish the details of Fingleton shortly, and it will be an important step forward on regulation of our industry, which they never did. On the North Sea, I think she said it's an incredibly important resource, which is exactly what I said in my statement. And indeed, we listened to the industry and took a pragmatic approach on tiebacks to existing fields, welcomed by the industry to keep our manifesto commitment of keeping existing oil and gas fields open for their lifetime. But I do just want to pause on this point about new exploration licences, Madam Deputy Speaker, because she raises it. The truth is, as everybody knows, new exploration licences, particularly in the light of tiebacks, will make no difference to production. And here's the really important thing about this, which is it's on average 10 years from exploration to production. And there's a very important report that came out from NESO on gas security of supply last year. What did it say was the biggest single thing we could do for security of supply is to drive towards a clean energy transition. Because the more we fail to do that, the more we are exposed, given that the North Sea is a declining basin that has seen production fall by 75% in the last 25 years and 70,000 jobs lost under them. On the windfall tax, I think I do want to take up this point. The Chancellor says she wants the windfall tax to end, but obviously she has to look at the current circumstances. Now, I notice the Conservative Party now disavows their decision to introduce the windfall tax. The windfall tax has raised £12 billion since 2022 because of supernormal profits, because of the profits that were going from our constituents into the pockets of oil and gas companies. So it's all very easy saying now, well, we shouldn't have done the windfall tax. Well, first of all, they did, but actually I think it was the right thing to do. So, look, absolutely my Iran and the Chancellor listens closely to the industry, indeed was talking to them yesterday on these issues, but I think it is important to recognise these other issues. On the EIA process, we're going to follow the right process. I'll tell her why, because we want to make sure it is legally watertight and it isn't subject to an endless judicial review, and actually that's what the industry itself wants. I'll just return to the original point, Madam Deputy Speaker. On China, well, he says on China, so I said last week it was a wacky internet conspiracy theory, and they said, well, no, it isn't, so why didn't you publish it? So I did, and now they've got nothing to say, truthfully. And not only did we publish our memo, but I'm glad to say we published theirs from 2015. What did that show? That we were going to get the Chinese to build nuclear power stations for us. Oh, for goodness sake! So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do urge all members of this House, look at the facts, look at the evidence, learn the right lessons.
Go with the Select Committee, Bill Esterson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the Energy Select Committee looked at the facts and looked at the evidence. We had the regulator Ofgem and we had the energy systems operator NESO telling us that the price cap will be in place till June as a short-term protection, that indeed Clean Power 2030 is the best way to avoid future exposure to the sorts of risks that we are now experiencing, that GDP, as a share of GDP, energy costs will fall from their current 10% to 5 to 6% by 2050, according to government plans, and that there is no prospect of bringing down prices by activity in the North Sea. But can I ask him what plans he has to give further short-term support to bill payers? We heard evidence about the reformed national pricing consultation underway at the moment. So can I encourage him to bring that forward so that bill payers can benefit from the availability of low-demand, cheap electricity as soon as possible as an immediate response to this crisis? Yeah.
My honourable friend speaks very wisely on these issues, and I agree with what he said about how we get energy security and the right thing to do. I just want to say on the question of bill payers, across government and indeed I'm sure across the House, we are incredibly alive and vigilant about these potential impacts. And I do think it's very, very important, and there is, I think, cross-party support for this. I think it is very important we have the price cap, because in a world without the price cap, we would see much more immediate effects. That doesn't mean to say that everyone is protected, but a lot of people, vast majority of people domestic consumers are protected by the price cap. On his point about shorter-term action, including through the RNP, as he said, look, across my department, as he can imagine, there is intensive work underway to look at all the options that we have. Much of this, as the regulator said to him yesterday, will depend on how long the crisis lasts. But I think the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have both shown their willingness and determination to act on bills, and I'm sure that will remain the case.
Perhaps spokesperson for Perkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So the conflict in the Middle East reminds us again how dangerously exposed the UK is to volatile global fossil fuel markets. And on the basis of forecasts by the Roundtree Foundation showing that just as happened after Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, rather than going down, energy bills could go up dramatically, placing further pressure on families and businesses struggling whilst energy companies make profits. My honourable friend, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, asked the Prime Minister yesterday to give a cast-iron guarantee to not let energy bills rise by £500 this year. He did not, so I will ask the Secretary of State instead, will he give that guarantee? And we must ask, why are we so exposed? It's our heavy reliance on gas, limited storage capacity, dependence on imports and falling domestic liquefied natural gas inventories. Yet as recently as January, the Conservatives were arguing in favour of continued reliance on gas due to the price falling at that time. It's taken less than 2 months for them to be proven wrong. Meanwhile, Mr Speaker, given the instability in European energy markets caused by the ongoing conflict, I'm glad to hear that the Secretary of State has engaged with energy counterparts in the EU and would like to hear more details of their analysis of potential impacts on supply, prices and regional energy security. Thank you.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions, and obviously I agree with her on the sort of fundamental point that she was making about why we are exposed. Let me say, on the question of cost of living support, these are obviously matters for the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, but I just want to sort of reiterate to her, the Chancellor showed a willingness to act on these issues in the budget, because she recognised the pressures that families were facing and that the cost of living crisis is by far the biggest issue facing our country. And the Prime Minister, again, Prime Minister's questions, reiterated the fact that we were keeping a very, very careful monitoring of this situation. And look, obviously, I think the government has shown its willingness to intervene, and if necessary, we will indeed intervene again. On her sort of the wider points that she makes, I think the most important thing I can emphasise to her is that we've got to go back to the fundamentals here, which is driving forward with clean power, driving forward with the insulation of homes, and indeed on the European counterparts that she asks about, they are facing similar challenges. And she is absolutely right that cooperation with our European colleagues, and indeed through the IEA, we are obviously all engaged on some of these questions that I raised in my statement around oil stocks. Cooperation with our European colleagues is particularly vital at this time.
Graeme Downie.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for a very measured and clear statement this afternoon. Can I ask him 2 particular points? One, can we make sure that if we do see rises in bills coming in forthcoming months, we make sure that the blame for that is firmly placed where it should be, which is the actions of the Iranian government by attacking and threatening the Strait of Hormuz? That's right. That's right. Second, can I ask him, at the Select Committee meeting yesterday, we heard from the Chief Executive of Ofgem that a prolonged period of time of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz would create an upward pressure on prices. He indicated during that evidence that the market was anticipating roughly 2 weeks is something that they could manage. Does he have any sense of what prolonged period of time might mean that would create that upward pressure as the conflict continues to develop? And will he ensure that the Select Committee and the House is kept informed as that progresses?
Well, can I thank him for his two excellent questions? Look, on the first point, he is absolutely right about this. I spoke to my counterpart, the Qatari Energy Minister, and it was the attacks on their LNG terminals and indeed fears for their, understandable fears for their workforce, caused by indiscriminate Iranian attacks that led to him make the decisions it is. It is Iranian threats to the Strait of Hormuz, which is preventing the passage of shipping, and I think he's absolutely right to emphasise that point. On his point about how long the conflict lasts, I won't speculate on that. Look, he's right to say that the longer the conflict goes on, obviously the more impact there will be on bill payers and indeed on our economy. That's why it's in all of our interests for this conflict to come to an end as soon as possible. And on his point about keeping the House informed and indeed the Select Committee, I undertake to do that.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Representing as I do the Brigg and Immingham constituency, I recognise that the renewable energy sector is attracting investment and jobs into the area. But I also have thousands of people who work in energy-intensive industry, and their jobs are increasingly at risk. As with everything, compromise is, and balance is important. Could I urge the Secretary of State to recognise that the energy costs for industry are crippling many businesses, and we must do something to address that?
I want to say to the honourable gentleman, I absolutely recognise the challenges that many businesses face, even before the crisis, because even before the crisis began, it's important to say that fossil fuel prices were still 40% higher than before Russia invaded Ukraine, and businesses were facing the impacts of that. Now, of course, we're taking action this April on the supercharger, but that is only for 500 or so of the most energy-intensive businesses. We're taking action next April on the British Industry Competitiveness Scheme. That's for 7,000 businesses. But I really want to say I recognise the point that he makes. And just as we are working and looking across government at the situation that households face, so indeed I was talking to my colleague, the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, Business and Trade yesterday, we're looking at the impact on businesses as well.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend's absolutely right to expose the utter folly of responding to the situation that faces us by saying what we need to do is to stop with renewables and invest more in oil and gas. It would be utter madness to learn that lesson. When we had the huge price spike as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the fact whether oil and gas was coming from the UK made no difference to the amount that our consumers paid, because it all was on the global markets. So my right honourable friend is absolutely right on that. But does he agree with me that the marginal pricing system, which was set up in a time when 80–90% of gas was being generated by fossil fuels, is far less robust at a time when we're down to 40% on gas and shrinking the entire time, over 50% coming from renewable sources now? And should we now be looking at the fact that because renewables are cheaper, we should have the benefit from that, rather than a system that, even if we only have 1% of gas, allows that to set the price?
Secretary of State.
I'll take that last bit of the question. I agree with the first part of his question, and I'll be as brief as I can be, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the marginal pricing question, which is the challenge. Look, the thing I would say to him is I completely understand the logic of where he's going with this question. Now, one of the benefits of a clean power system is that gas will set the price much less of the time. And one of the benefits of moving from the RO, renewables obligation, to CFDs is that that gives you a fixed price, not subject to the marginal price of gas. Now, the principle that he's espousing is one I am sympathetic to. The truth is, though, there are significant obstacles to getting to what he wants to see in a timely way and in a way that is better for bill payers. But of course, among all other things, this is something our department continues to look at.
Wera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Energy Security Net Zero Select Committee is running an inquiry into the cost of energy, as we have already heard from the Chair. And with due respect, Madam Deputy Speaker, I cannot understand how the Conservative opposition can, with a straight face, deplore the cost of energy for bill payers, while at the same time advocating prolonging our dependency on oil and gas, which is precisely which keeps our energy bills high. But coming back to our inquiry, we heard from one of our witnesses from E3G that there could be costs of up to £500 per household in hidden profits due to the intransparent network charges put onto energy bills. Will the government ensure that bill payers are given the full picture of the breakdown of profits across the energy sector?
Well, I thank her for her question and the point she makes. It's worth saying, by the way, that Lord Brown, formerly of BP, was on the radio yesterday, precisely making the same point that she did and I did. This is a man who used to run one of the world's largest oil and gas companies, who said, look, the lesson of this crisis, we've got to get onto clean power. On her point about networks, I think it is important to be transparent about it. It's also important to bear down on these costs, and that's something, obviously, I discuss a lot with the regulator.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend talked about lessons learned, and despite my youthful good looks, I actually recall the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the last Iranian Revolution. And, of course, that led to a fuel crisis globally. It is the reason why what we're doing the importance of it is underlined by the need for the energy transition and improving our domestic energy resilience. Why we need to see more renewables, why we need to roll out Rolls-Royce small modular reactors urgently and take a lead globally on that. My right honourable friend talked about household support. What do you think, does he think that President Trump was thinking in terms of what impact this would have on businesses and the humble motorist?
I'll start by saying that my honourable friend was obviously a precocious 5-year-old in 1979, Madam Deputy Speaker, with a great knowledge of politics and an interest in it. I won't speculate on the last part of his question. I do think what my honourable friend said about the indiscriminate Iranian attacks is really an important point to underline. The fundamental point he makes about driving forward with renewables, nuclear, all of those things that get us off these markets is surely the lesson that we must all learn from this crisis.
Sir Julian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, thank the Secretary of State for his update. Could I echo calls for support for business, or keeping an eye on the impact of this crisis on business, but also for areas like mine in North Yorkshire, off-grid gas and oil customers do not have the same protection as many other energy customers, and could he and his team also focus or have regard for those customers as this crisis evolves?
I thank him for his point on business, and particularly on the issue of heating oil, which is a really, really important point, because people who are using heating oil are exposed to what is happening in the market. Now, obviously, it depends when they are restocking their heating oil, and as I've said a number of times, depends on how long the crisis goes on. But I think he's right to raise that point as a particular area that we need to look at.
Ben Goldsborough.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And to follow on exactly from that question, I also represent a very rural constituency in South Norfolk, and there will be constituencies up and down the United Kingdom, and particularly Northern Ireland as well, where we are heavily reliant on heating oil as our source of energy. Can I ask the Secretary of State what action is going to be taken for the medium and short term to try and take into account the price shocks? Because already I've had the chair of the parish council in Thurleton in touch, and many, many constituents who are very, very worried about this price shock.
Well, obviously, we're in the first few days of this crisis, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the best thing I can say to my honourable friend, and indeed honourable members on all sides who are concerned about this issue, and totally understandably so, is we're very much aware of where the exposure comes, the fact that the price cap is a guarantee, and I chose my words carefully earlier by saying for the vast majority of people, the price cap of domestic consumers, it provides a guarantee. with those using heating oil in mind, that they were not, that they were more exposed. We will look at that issue, and indeed I go back to the wider point I made, which is both the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have shown a determination to act on the cost of living crisis, and obviously much of this depends on how long the crisis goes on, but the point is well taken.
Please, Saville Roberts.
I appreciate what the Minister's just said about heating oil, because in Dwyfor, Meirionnydd, 55% of households are off the gas grid. Many rely on alternative heating fuels, and they aren't, of course, protected by the energy cap price. We also pay the highest standing charges of any region in the United Kingdom and are exposed to global market shocks in the sense that deliveries can be late and also the prices are passed straight on. In the energy crisis triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, off-grid households had to wait months longer for any support, but they did get a one-off alternative fuel payment of £200. Could he tell me whether he would consider something similar to the alternative fuel payment at this time?
I won't speculate on that, but what I will say to her is something important, which is one of the things that I've emphasised in all the calls I've had and the discussions within my department, and I think this is very, very important, is we must learn what was done right during the Russia-Ukraine crisis in terms of the previous government's response and where there were challenges and what lessons we must learn. And that's been one of the emphases I've placed on both my conversations with our civil servants, with other businesses and indeed international partners. And I've sort of heard what she said on this specific issue and will definitely bear it in mind.
Perran.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's perfectly reasonable for opposition parties to espouse the policy of reopening oil and gas fields. It's just the wrong policy. And there is no clearer example that it's the wrong policy than a moment like this. The only way that we can generate energy independence is by accelerating our transition to renewable energy. And with that in mind, and I know that the Secretary of State is very much focused on onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, would he think again about the Department's policy towards geothermal energy? We've just had our first geothermal energy plant open in Cornwall. We've got vast deposits of geothermal energy. I think it could be a really useful addition to the mix of renewable energy.
Let me first of all celebrate the opening of the plant. Indeed, I sent a video celebrating the opening of the plant. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but I congratulated my honourable friend on his brilliant advocacy. Look, I accept the point he makes, which is we've got to look at all of the technologies at our disposal. One of the reasons that I'm very glad that Lord Whitehead has joined our department is he's got a specific brief, as he will know, covering these alternative technologies. And absolutely, my view is if it can bring down bills, if it can help get to cleaner power, then we should go for it.
Sir Julian Lewis.
I fully accept the argument that energy independence will be enhanced both by renewable energy and in particular by nuclear energy. But everyone seems to accept that we will go on having some dependence on fossil fuels for a considerable period of time. Whilst it's discouraging to hear that no matter how much we extract from the North Sea, it won't lower prices, although that does sound rather a strange conclusion, but I'm willing to accept that it's true. The fact is that if we are going to need such supplies for a considerable period of time, they may be cut off from other sources. Therefore, security of supply is an important element of the mix. Isn't that obvious?
Do you say to him that's why we said in our manifesto we would keep existing oil and gas fields open for their lifetime? And indeed, we didn't just say it. We had a very good dialogue with the industry where they said one of the things that will make existing oil and gas fields competitive is if you have tiebacks to those fields with new production. And indeed, we listened and we accepted it. I think the point I would make, and I have great respect for the honourable gentleman, the point I would make to him is, I think the issue he's averting to is exploration licences, because the North Sea is a declining basin. Obviously, there are tax matters, they're a matter for the Chancellor. All of the evidence is that exploration licences in terms of production are entirely marginal, and the average time, as I said earlier on, from exploration to production is 10 years. But in the 10-year view, the most important thing we can do for our energy security, by far, multiple times by far, is drive towards the clean power, which I think he supports and which is the centrepiece of our government strategy.
Before I call the next question, can I just remind members to keep their questions and perhaps answers short? Ewan Steinbank.
I appreciate the Secretary of State's incredibly important update to the House, especially regarding energy security. There have been reports in the media of PetroChina being barred from all exports of diesel and gasoline by the Chinese government. With PetroChina's co-ownership of the Grangemouth import terminal and following their role in the closure of Scotland's only oil refinery last year, what assurances can the Secretary of State provide my constituents regarding security of imported supply coming through Grangemouth?
Good question.
We use negligible amounts of fuel from China, and I can absolutely reassure my honourable friend and indeed his constituents on security of supply.
Claire Young.
Deputy Speaker. On nuclear, I note that had SMRs gone to Oldbury, Wilbur would still be available for other options to reduce our fossil fuel dependence. But I want to ask about small businesses. On top of a rising tax burden, the fear of further energy spikes makes small businesses in my constituency, particularly energy-intensive ones like hospitality and manufacturing, fear for their survival. Will the Secretary of State introduce new measures to support them?
Well, the Honourable Lady raises a very important issue, and indeed my honourable friend who's briefly left the chamber has got a particular, who is partly a minister in DBT, has got a particular focus on how we can help small businesses in terms of getting them better deals, better regulation of the deals they get is one of the things. Ofgem is going to have a role in what was previously an under-regulated market. But then on the wider point, which is the impact of this crisis on them, I reiterate by way of reassurance, I think, to her what I've said to others in this House, which is, absolutely this government is very, very focused on the impact of this crisis on households and indeed businesses, and we won't hesitate to act.
Catherine Fuchs.
Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his statement and for this government's laser focus on renewable energy in England and Wales. So does he agree with me that this should deliver basically a triple whammy for us? We will not be at the mercy of foreign states for our energy, bills for consumers will go down, and finally we will reduce the impact of the biggest threat to our planet, which is climate change.
I think my honourable friend is so right, and I do say actually one thing that is very, very interesting is when I talk to partners across the world, including in Europe, as the Liberal Democrats asked about, and indeed elsewhere, so many countries now have this approach, which is the case for renewables was always a climate case, but it is now for so many an energy security case, as much as a climate case, because they're in similar place to us. They are price takers, not price makers.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State very much for his statement. As soon as the first missiles were launched over Iran, those within the energy sector were already warning that prices would escalate. The public can little afford the price gouging that took place when Russia invaded Ukraine. So what steps will the Secretary of State take to ensure that any rise is absolutely necessary and will not result in greater profits for certain people and companies? And what consideration will be given to any energy scheme to help working families meet the costs? Thanks so much.
Yeah. Well, the honourable gentleman speaks with great eloquence on these issues on behalf of his constituents and others. And he's absolutely right that in a situation like this, everyone has responsibility. Government has responsibility. Private companies have responsibility too, and I think he's right to make them aware of that. And then on the wider question on impacts on families, I think it is important that government is very vigilant about the steps we can take to help people.
Alex Serble.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think that one of the lessons first from the Russia-Ukraine war and now the war in the Middle East is that oil refineries and fossil fuel infrastructure are primary targets, and the energy price are now part of war strategy. Our race to renewables isn't just important here in the UK, but around the world, looking at, for instance, the Urals crude price has now nearly reached the price of other crude markets. And we need to ensure that others are not reliant on Russian oil being delivered by the shadow fleet. Is the Secretary of State working with other countries to ensure that they are taking the same path in terms of the renewable transformation as we are?
Friend speaks with great eloquence on these issues, Madam Deputy Speaker, and he is absolutely right. And in a sense, as I said earlier to my honourable friend, it's so striking that so many countries now talk about these issues as an energy security issue. For the 80-plus countries who supported a roadmap to the transition away from fossil fuels at COP30, it was as much about energy security, as much about their own situation, as much about bills and their fear about exposure as it was, obviously, about the long-term threat we face from the climate crisis, crucial as that is.
Lincoln Jock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement, which I read with very closely and then listened to very closely too. Would it be fair to summarise the Secretary of State's statement today that he is not going to change, actually do anything differently as a result of the conflict in Iran? Because I listened for it and read it very carefully in the statement. It didn't appear to me that we're going to change anything. It was more a series of things that we were doing already.
No, I don't think that's right at all. Look, I think the truth is about these crises is that it's incredibly important that government looks at everything it can do, in particular to help, as I've said a number of times in this statement, the impact on families and businesses. What I want to reassure him and the House of is that this government has the right strategy on energy policy. And if I may say to him, what I think the lesson we all need to learn is this exposure to fossil fuel markets is dangerous for the country, and the best thing we can do of all, is speed up as much as we can our drive to renewables and indeed to nuclear, and the more help he can give us supporting that, the better.
Clive Efford.
Deputy Speaker, I welcome my right honourable friend's statement, and all I can say is more power to his renewable elbow. Because it just seems to me that we go, in my time here, we've gone through these crises. The price in oil and gas goes up. Our constituents pay higher bills, the businesses pay higher bills, and the Conservatives learn nothing and don't realise that the only way to really provide secure and cheaper energy is to have a secure supply here at home. But nonetheless, in the meantime, we are stuck with it. So can I just urge him to be open to assisting our constituents and businesses if they do see a severe spike in their energy bills?
To respond, I must conclude this in around 15 minutes. Questions must be shorter. Minister, answers just as sharp.
I'm glad to hear that my elbow is renewable, and I do agree with him that we must be willing to act on behalf of his constituents and others.
Amanda Hagg.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank the Secretary of State for his statement. Households, businesses and charities in North West Leicestershire have already highlighted some immediate pressures on the cost of heating oil and fuel costs in recent days. Does the Secretary of State agree that energy security across our country is vital and that cheap, clean power is key to delivering that security? But could he share what additional work he will be doing to secure energy costs for our families and businesses in North West Leicestershire and beyond? Yeah.
Well, I do say to my honourable friend that she's right to raise the heating oil issue, and as I've said a number of times, I think it is an important thing, and it is very, very much on our radar. And on the wider point, she's absolutely right too.
Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. He's right when he says that because of our reliance on oil and gas, we are a price taker, not a price maker. We are exposed, and families in Burnley, Padiham and Briarfield are worried. Will he continue to strengthen our homegrown sovereign energy supplies and production to keep driving down energy bills? And will he perhaps, given potential future wholesale price volatility, look at getting suppliers in the room again to reduce standing charges, which people see as unfair, regressive and unrelated to their energy use?
On standing charges, somebody asked me about it earlier, and I neglected to respond. One important thing that we did was to transfer the warm homes discount from standing charges to unit rates, which helped make a difference on bearing down on standing charges. But I do reassure him, and indeed many of his constituents and others who are concerned about this issue, something I talk about with Martin Lewis and others, we continue to look at this issue.
Pascal.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I really do thank the Secretary of State for all that he is doing. But at times like this, we think about our most vulnerable constituents. And whilst the energy price cap will protect them for now, we worry about the longer term, not least moving into next winter. Can my honourable friends just say what he's doing around social prescriptions and also social tariffs to ensure that we really do protect those most vulnerable constituents?
Well, an important decision we took was not only to extend the warm home discount for this winter, but for 5 years ahead, to give assurance to 6 million people, including in her constituency, that they would have protection. I want to reassure her, though, we know, particularly, and she speaks so well for the most vulnerable in our society and in her constituency, we know the exposure people have, and we continue to look at all of the measures we can take to help people.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is precious little good news around at the moment, but I may actually have some for the Secretary of State. I've listened to the contributions from the benches opposite, and I think I've discovered a new renewable energy source. The amount of hot air coming from that side of the House could surely heat 100 homes. However,
get it drilled.
My question is whether the Secretary of State thinks that if we were to do what the Shadow Minister suggested and cut the energy level at a time when prices are spiking and profits are about to rise, whether his constituents in Doncaster North would welcome that, because mine in Lichfield, Burntwood and the Villages would not appreciate letting companies off like that.
My honourable friend makes his point in a very eloquent and amusing way. I mean, the thing I would say to him is, I think this is why it's so important to recognise that gambling on low fossil fuel prices, it's crises like this that show that gambling on low fossil fuel prices is so dangerous, because the impacts that it can have because of geopolitical instability are so great on his constituents and those across the country.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Secretary of State's statement, although I do want to gently disagree with one point, because I think he made the point that he believes the opposition have failed to learn the lessons or somehow forgotten the lessons from Ukraine. I actually think it is worse. It is nothing more than short-term opportunism. They hoped that nothing like Ukraine would happen again, so forgetting the lessons that drove up bills and did significant damage to our economy. So does he agree that their short-term opportunism on energy security and national security is not in the long-term interest of our country?
And I think it's incumbent on all of us to tell people on the basis of the evidence what we should be doing as a country. And we've heard from so many parts of the House today a recognition that actually betting on fossil fuels, gambling on fossil fuels, is incredibly dangerous.
The statement is a stark reminder that energy security is national security, is economic security. And for those who oppose clean, green British power, are handing a gift to those people who wish to do us harm. Will my right honourable friend ensure that it's only the British interest that determines energy policy?
Honourable friend puts it incredibly well. This is about clean, homegrown power that we control, not international markets, not those fluctuations, so we get off that roller coaster which does such damage to families across the country.
Mary Glindon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, but at a time when the UK is increasingly dependent and exposed to internationally traded LNG, doesn't delaying the OGPM risk reducing investment in domestic supply exactly when global markets are least stable?
Well, I agree with my honourable friend that driving to renewables, driving to clean homegrown power is crucial. I also would say, because I know she takes an interest in these things, the North Sea continues to play an important role in our energy mix and will do so for decades to come.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's interesting to note for the duration of this statement and question and answer session that there's been zero participation from the SNP and Reform. Goes to show exactly how much they care. Both parties care about Scotland's energy security. Now, I understand and I appreciate the Secretary of State won't be able to give an in-depth response to the dispatch box today, but can he give any update on Project Willow at Grangemouth? Specifically, I want to know about future jobs that are coming to the town and any potential government ownership, securing our industrial security and Scotland's energy sovereignty.
Well, my honourable friend is a very important advocate for his constituents and indeed for Project Willow. He'll know that we've made a number of announcements around Grangemouth in recent months, but I can also assure him that we continue to drive forward on Project Willow. The Prime Minister set out £200 million that will be available from the National Wealth Fund. We continue to work with private industry because we are determined to create a future for Grangemouth and its communities.
Andrew Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And this will be a worrying time, not only for households, but for the energy-intensive businesses in my constituency. We already lost soda ash production from Northwich after 150 years last year, in part due to their high energy costs. I wonder if my right honourable friend could say what support he intends to provide businesses, both to get through this crisis and into the future, so we can make sure that they stay viable and competitive.
Well, the step forward we're taking, Madam Deputy Speaker, is to give more help to the energy intensives, both this April and indeed next April when we get to 7,000 businesses. But I want to acknowledge, as I did, I think, to one of the honourable members opposite, we know there is further to go on helping businesses. Energy UK and the CBI have now formed a joint partnership looking at these issues. We want to work with them. You know, there are always, one of the challenges here is around the costs of action, but we recognise the issue that my honourable friend raised.
Question, Samantha Niblett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today, and the statement, which I'm very grateful for, really does drive home the importance of energy security and the move to renewable, but just as equally important is food security. And in my constituency of South Derbyshire, we have had a plethora of applications for BESS and solar farms because we have close connection to two grids. It's not to say that we don't need that, but I wonder whether he would meet with me and the member for Rushcliffe and other members of the Labour Rural Research Group to discuss the benefits of a local area energy plan.
Well, my honourable friend speaks very well on these issues, and I'm sure the Minister for Energy will meet with them and talk to them about these issues. As she will know, that we operate under guidance from the last government around avoiding the best available land where at all possible, even on the most ambitious plans for solar. It would occupy a very small fraction of agricultural land. But also I'd make this point. We had the largest ever solar auction in AR7, 5 gigawatts actually. Really good. And it's I'll tell him how much. It's the cheapest, around £60 per megawatt hour, and it's far cheaper than building new gas. And that is the fundamental point of this statement, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will carry on our drive to clean, homegrown power, because that is the right thing for our national interest.
Thank you. That is the end of the statement on energy markets. I'll give the front benches to